In this video, you'll learn the basics of making relief collagraph blocks. So, a collagraph is a print that's printed from a matrix or a block that's made of collage and other materials. Unlike intaglio or relief, where you remove material by etching or carving, you make your block additively using various materials. These are some examples of possible collagraph materials: an egg carton, a styrofoam plate, felt, twine, rubber bands, this flexible craft foam. This is a mesh produce bag and a piece of a shelf liner. Masking tape can also make really great marks. Cut paper, both the positive and negative shapes. Leaves, flowers, things found in nature. Now I want to talk about some items to avoid. Hard metal or plastic objects you want to stay away from, especially if you plan to print on the press. You should never run hard metal or oddly shaped objects through the press, as it can damage it. It can damage the felts and it can damage your plate. You want to keep the plate at a uniform thickness as much as possible. So look for textures, but aim to make your plate no thicker than an 1/8 inch in any one area, and absolutely avoid metal or hard plastic objects if you're going to be printing using the press. To begin, you will need some pieces of mat board or cardboard, and you're going to want about 10 pieces that are roughly 8 inches by 10 inches in size. You will also need some matte medium and a few brushes. First, I'll show you some of the basics of making a block using this leaf. You'll want to brush a generous amount of matte medium onto the board and then press the leaf into it. You can also use a little matte board card, which I often do, and spread the matte medium around that way. If you find that it's curling up or not sticking, you might want to let it dry for a while and then seal the whole block with matte medium. You want to make sure it's really securely glued to the board and fully dry. The matte medium acts both as an adhesive and as a sealant for making our blocks. Next, I will make a block using some rubber bands. My process will be basically the same. And keep in mind, you don't have to use the same materials I'm using. These are just suggestions and tips for adhering the items to your blocks. I'll spread some glue, and then I will place my rubber bands where I want them in the wet glue. Be mindful of places where there's overlap so that your block doesn't become too thick. The more overlap you have, the harder it is to ink and to print. So you may want to cut the bands in the places where there's overlap. But the key to this project is experimenting with different materials. There's not one right way to do it. After I've placed them on the board on top of the wet matte medium, I will then seal them in place with more matte medium over the top. Another way of working is to take an X-Acto knife and make cuts directly into that first ply of the mat board in order to remove a thin layer from the surface. The marks here are subtle, but they do print, and after I cut this, you'll be able to see the rough texture under that first ply that has been exposed. This is still my block that I cut into with the knife, and now I'm going to add a few strips of masking tape just for some added texture, and then I will seal the whole thing with matte medium and allow it to fully dry before printing. On this piece, I'm going to glue a piece of a styrofoam plate using the same method as before. Hopefully you have more matte medium left than I do. After I adhere it, I can then press into it with a hard object to make marks. I'm just going to use the back of my X-Acto handle, but really any hard object will work to make an impression into the styrofoam. You can see the impression that was made there. I can also draw with liquid glue. There are a lot of marks that are interesting that you can make just by directly drawing with. Again, these are just suggestions for things that you can do. It's really up to you to experiment with different materials to see what kind of impressions you can get with found textures and objects.